Yeah, hello guys, welcome to the new session. And this session we'll be going through the process of basically we're going through the process of actually registering the user into the application. So in this session, what we'll be focusing on is checking I've itemized it. Remember when we actually defined our user model, we stated that the email has to be unique. And if the email is going to be unique, if users supply emails that already exist, our GORM is going to throw an error. And that is why we are actually going to make sure that we actually check if the email exists before going ahead to register the user. So what we are going to do now is we are going to create a service file right under our API. I'm going to call it services. And our services file, the first service we'll be creating is a user service. Um, our user service is going to be, we are going to create a type struct and we are going to call it user service. The user service is going to accept the DB provided by DB, DB. So that is so that it will have access to actually call the database and we can execute different tasks against our user model. So I'm going to create a function to return a new user service. I'm going to call this user service and going to call it new user service, right? So this new user service is basically going to return a pointer to user service itself, accepting the DB value. So this user service is going to accept a database of type GORM model, like so, and too many arguments to return. So this is going to be a pointer to the user service. So this should no longer be true. User service. Uh, uh, get Okay, we are getting some sort of error. Okay, sorry. This should be like a pointer like so. So yeah, so we are good now. So now what we have to do now is we need to create some methods, all right, that we can use to actually call, that we can use to create user and actually check if a user exists by email address. So the first method I'll be creating is the method for okay, this should not have a receiver. Sorry, this should not have a receiver. It's just new user service. So call this user service, then user service. This will be register user, and the register user method will be expecting um the first thing it will be expecting is the user request user request that we created. Requests. uh, okay, store. Okay, let me see what's the name of the request. Okay, register user request, and we are going to, let's yeah, correct. So it is expecting the register user request. And what else can we respect? So let's leave it at that for now. And it is going to return us a pointer to the user model or an error. I'm just going to return, let me just return nil for now. Or let me just put a panic implement me. I'm also going to create another method, and I'm going to call it get user by email. So this will basically be expecting an email, and it will be of type string. So now remember, we are using GORM, and because we are using GORM, a lot of things has been done for us that will make our life really, really easy. So in order for you to check if a user exists, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a user model, and I'm also going to then call, so you can see my ORM is already giving me a completion just to make this faster. So what this is going to do now is, this has to be in small letter, user service. It can be the same name as user service, and I'm going to use a pointer. I'm going to use a pointer here as well. So what this is going to do now is user service. So what this is going to do now is it is going to call the DB variable or attribute that is associated to the user service, and it's going to call the where method. So if we go back to the GORM, let's go to GORM. Yeah. So let's see how we actually query models. So there are a couple of ways to actually query your database. Let me see. Yeah, so this is what we are using. So this is basically going to do a where, right? It's going to generate a where statement against saying where name is equals to Jinzu, and it is going to pick the first one, and the results of this will then be populated into the user struct that has been initiated, right? That is the idea around this. So now what I'm going to do now is, so what we've done now is we've created a variable called user that belongs to the user model, and we've passed a pointer to the first method that we are going to use to fetch the user that actually owns, if a user, to the user that we are going to use it to associate it to the user that owns an email if they exist. Then what this is going to do is it is going to replace the value that is retrieved from the database with the attributes of the user model. We are going to see it in action really soon. So now this actually returns something. It returns an error, or it could actually be an error, that is, if the user does not exist, then we should be expecting nil. But if the user exists, we will not be getting nil. We'll be getting our user model filled up. So I'm going to check if results, I'm not sure rows affected is the correct. Let's see how it is being used. Okay, this is find. It's first that we are trying to use. How do they use it? Well, let us inspect this method ourselves. So we can see it is doing a query with a limit of 1. If the condition is greater than 0, blah, 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 it executes. So this execute returns don't let us waste time on this. Let's go back to the user service. We'll see what works for us. But I do know that if so if an error occurs during the process of actually performing our query, right? An error, that is an error occurs, is nil, is not nil, then that means if the result.error is not nil, then that means an error has occurred during the process of our query. Otherwise, we just need to return the user and or nil since there is no error, right? So if, okay, let me correct myself. If there is no user with the email passed, our user model, this user that we are sending will be nil, right? But if there is a user, it will not be nil. So which means in order for us to, so what we are going to do now is let's go back to our user request. Let's go back to our auth handler, and we are going to use our user service right here. So let me create a new user service, user service. What's the best way to actually go about this? Okay, let's get a new user service, user service, user service. It will be now called the new user service, new user service, and pass in the DB. Now remember that in our main.go file, during the process of initiating our handler, we've actually passed the DB that was actually our DB instance to this handler. That was why we actually did this. So that way now in our auth handler, we can just say handler.db. Now we have access to the initiated DB instance. So now we can say, if we can say user exists, right? And comma error, where user service dot get user by email. So the user service, so this has to be, sorry, this has to be like so. So now remember that so we can access the email by saying payload dot email. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that an error did not occur. So if an error occurs, let's just see for ourselves. fmt.println error, comma, user exists. Now let's start our application. Now that our application is started, let's come to this, our postman, and hit the API. Now let's just look at our error message. We can see that we are getting a record not found error message, record not found, and the user object is actually nil based on how we actually printed it out. We printed the error and we printed the user struct, which is actually nil. So what we want to do is, if the type of error that was sent to us, errors dot in GORM, there is a way you can check the type of an error. Like, it's more like if you're coming from a Java or PHP background or C#, just like you check for the instance of a class, you can also check if an error is of type. Now the GORM has something, if record is not found, when you actually use the query method like we did, the GORM has a particular error that is sent, which is So if our error is type GORM dot record not found, right? If it is of type record not found, then that means we can go ahead. So if it is of type record not found and the value of this is false, that is, we are saying if the error type is of type record not found, right? And the value is false. It's more of, let's say, we can say if not, this is the same thing as saying if it is false. So if it is not a type of GORM record not found, which is what this false is, I'm just putting this false for this code to be explicit. We can tell the user, that is, we can send common dot send not found response. Now, what we are doing is, sorry, record exists, or bad request, actually, bad request. So we are basically, what we are trying to do is we are telling the user that an email already exists, and our error will be user already exists, or we can just say email has already been taken, right? And we'll return this. Do not forget to return it. Then let us print user exists. Although the user currently does not exist, but just to showcase, I'll set this to true so that we can get the error, because we are going to get error record not found. Because if we go to our database, we see that we don't have any record in our users database at all. So that means the record will not be found. So if we come to Postman and test this, okay, I'm not okay. We need to refresh our application. Now, if we come back to Postman and it, so you can see now we are getting email has already been taken. So I'm going to change this back to false. And so if the email has not yet been taken, the next step for us is to basically register our user, right? So let's go back to our user service. And so in order to create our user, remember that the first thing, in order to create our user, the first thing we have to do is we have to hash the password, because we can't save plain text in the database, and that is why we have to hash our password. And in order to hash a password, let's go to, we need the we need the go package hash password GORM. So the package we are going to be needing is this go get bcrypt. And let's see how it was used. So we need to create two methods. The first method is to hash the password. The second method is to compare the password. So this method now, what this method will be doing for us is a plain text will be passed, and an hash string, that is the hashed password that will be saving in our database, will also be passed. So this compare hash password will now help us check if the passed password, the plain text password, is equals to the hash password. So we'll see it in usage very soon. So I'm just going to install the package, copy and paste and install. So it is downloading. Very good. Now that we have it downloaded, so I'm going to go to our common file and I'm going to create a folder called password. So this folder will basically just contain any function regarding password. So I'm just going to come back here and copy this. There is no point re-implementing what does not actually exist. So now this password, a password will be generated, that is an hashed password will be generated for us at the cost of 4. We don't need to go deep into this, just know how to actually make use of this particular package. And this one is basically for us to check if the past password is correct. We will use this when we want to do the login endpoints. Now that we actually have that, we can then go ahead to our user service, right? We can then go to our user service and say that hashed password, comma, error equals to the method that we've actually created, common dot hash password request dot user password inside our user request. Now we will check if error is nil. If error is not nil, we want to return an error. We want to return an error. We want to return nil for the user model, and we are going to return the error that actually occurred. So, but I would not want to send this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say user service.db.log. I think our okay, let's just use the fmt package print line. Or another thing that we can do is, since in our context we have access to the logger, right? So let's go to our main file. Let's associate the logger to our handler. So I'm just going to go copy this and I'm going to go into the handler and paste it right there. Then I'm going to come to the main file and I'm going to associate the logger to it right there. It's not okay. We need to make that accessible publicly. Then we'll come back to the main file. We'll call it logger. So then we are going to go back to our user service. We can then return an error. Okay, wait. I don't want to pass too many things around, and I want access to the logger. How best can we handle this? So go back to the auth handler. Okay, for now, let us just return error dot. I'm just going to return errors dot new, and I'm going to say user registration field. I don't want to send it to the front end or to the client that their password hashing field. So which is why I'm just going to do fmt.println the error. So that way we can always investigate what is actually going on within our application without sending what is not needed to the user. Now that that is taken care of, let's print the hashed password and let's restart our application. Okay, we are getting an error. User exists declared but not used. So let's go back to our auth handler. I'm just going to print fmt dot print line user exists. Then I'm going to rerun this, go back to our postman. Now you can see from our okay, let me see, what are we trying to do? We are trying to print the hashed password, right? Hashed password is not getting printed. Am I not seeing it? Okay, let me go. Okay, we are not calling the register user request yet. So let's call the register user request user service dot register user, and we are going to pass in the user requests user. That will be our payload. Sorry, that will be the payload. Okay, is expecting. Okay, we are going to pass it as a pointer, like so. So what we are doing here is we are dereferencing the payload in order for us to be able to pass it to the user this thing. Or what we can just do is, in order to not to avoid that, we can just pass the model itself. We can pass the pointer itself. So that way we don't need to dereference. So let's restart our application again. Let's go to our postman. Now let's go to, so you can see now we are getting that hashed password, right? We are getting that hashed password. So let's go back to our register user, or I can even just say fmt. Let me use fmt.println. I'm going to reload the app again so that it can be clear to us. If we print again, so you can see that we are getting that hash. We are getting that hashed password, right? So that means our password is being hashed. What is left for us now is to actually save the user in the database. Well, let me just call this registration field. Sorry, registration field. So or we can actually, let's leave it at that for now. So the next thing now need to actually, let's look at our GORM model. How do we actually create, uh, how do we create? So there are a couple of ways to create. You can create using a struct like so, then calling the result db, then you can get if there is an error, if there's any rules affected, that is, it was the item was actually inserted. You can also create multiple users like this. You can also do batch insert, but this is what we are interested in, right? So what we are going to do now is we are going to instantiate our user model, created, I'm going to call it created user, and I'm going to call the models user. Let me fill the fields. I don't want to, I'm too lazy. I don't want to type it one after the other. Models user. I'm going to fill all fields. So, but I'm going to remove the model. Then I'm going to remove gender. I'm going to leave first name. So from our payload, we can say user request dot first name. So because so now there is a difference between how we defined this attribute in our user model and how we defined it in the register user request. So we have some couple of options. We could say this, we could do this, or let me just show us that. Let's say last name. Then we have the email. This will not need this. This will just be email. And this will be user request.password. So this will not be user request.password. So this will be our hashed password, right? That is what we want to actually save into the database. Now that we've actually instantiated the user model, we can then go ahead to say result equals to user service. So that will be user service.db.create, which is basically what is actually done here, db.create user. So we are passing a pointer, part of the where we are passing a pointer to the create method. So what this will do for us is, if the creation is successful, it will actually update this created user model with all the necessary data, right? And the next thing we need to do, as usual, is check if result.error is not nil. If the result.error is not nil, we want to print it. Otherwise, we want to return an error saying user registration failed, right? So if there is no error, what we want to do is basically return the user, created user. And so as we are seeing, we are sending a pointer and error. So if the user is created successfully, we are going to send the created user and we are going to send a nil, since there is no longer an error. So the next thing I want to do now is, let's go to our handler, and we are going to, let's go to our auth handler, and we are going to, let's undo the error. So let me call this registered user, right? User, and I'm going to pass this right here as our data. Remember that our success response expects an echo context, a message stating what happened, and and a data. It can be of any type. So now let's remove this now. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this. We don't need that user exists for now. So let's try to see if our registration goes through. Now we can see that we are getting registration successful. If we go to our database now, let's select users, select data. We are not seeing the data in the database. We are getting registration successful. So what could be wrong? So I need to send error here. I need to send error here. So this will be internal server error. So we could say the error that is actually coming, error. For some reason the user is not being created. So let me try this again. Okay. So the reason why our user is not getting created is because we actually need to refresh our application to pick up the new system changes. Now let's hit the user palm. Now we can see that our user is now being created. We are getting the created ads, we are getting the updated ads, and we are getting the deleted ads. So all these attributes that you are seeing now is associated to, let's check our model, is based on the association we've actually created here. So what I'm going to do now is I want to change the way these attributes are being sent as JSON. So what we are basically going to do is we are just going to specify the JSON tag as first name, JSON tag of this as last name, the JSON tag JSON tag of this as email, the JSON tag of this as gender, and the JSON tag of this as password, right? So if we try to register a user now, so you can see our checking for if email already exists is working, right? So I need to refresh our application, restart. Then I'm going to create a user with a new name, with a new email address, and send. Now you can see that we are getting our user model attributes nicely formatted, right? So, but one thing that I want us to take note is that it does not make sense for us to actually be sending out the user. It does not make sense to be sending out the user password after creation. So the question now is, how do we prevent our model from serializing the user password? In order to prevent our password being sent out, all we need to do is just pass this, right? And automatically our password will no longer be serialized. So let's refresh our application and let's hit this endpoint again. So we are getting email already exists. Let's put in another email. Now we can see that our password is no longer coming. But the one thing I want to do is I want to also serialize the created at the deleted at to display in underscore, so that our response, the way we are sending response out to users, is actually formatted and it is uniform across the application. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a base model. So the base model is basically a struct that will contain all the attributes that is given to us by the GORM model itself. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to go to the base model, create a struct, and call it base model, and paste. Now the deleted at is basically of type. If we check the base model, the deleted at, this is basically what it is. We just copy, come back here, paste, and we are good. Our base model is good now. So we are going to define the JSON tag ID. Then we are also going to define the JSON tag as this, as that, and deleted at. We don't even need to return the deleted at. So we are just going to remove it from the JSON response, like so. So we are now going to come back to our user model and replace it with the base model, like so. If we refresh our application, let's try to register again. Now you see we are getting email already taken. Let's change this up to 3. Hit again. We are still getting email taken. So let's hit it up to 4. Email taken. Okay, we are getting an error. Invalid field found for struct user model. Field deleted and define a valid foreign key for relations to implement the value scanner. So let's look at our base model again. Seems it is throwing some error. Something is okay. So in order to, for the deleted at, we can't actually use this. What we are going to use is we are just going to call the GORM deleted at attribute. So that way it should be able to actually use it the way it should. So now let's come back. Let's refresh our application. Let's come back here. It. Now, very good. So you can see now our created art is coming, updated art is coming, nice and well formatted. So yeah, that will be the end of this session. It's over 40 minutes already. And in the next session, what I'll be doing is to show us how we can actually send a welcome message to our user so that they can actually know that their registration was successful. Then I forgot to even show us our users in the database. So you can see our users have been created in the database. So that's what we'll be doing in the next session. We will be sending a welcome message to the user so that they can know their account has been created. So thank you very much for staying with me. I hope you actually enjoyed this session, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session where we are going to be learning how to actually send email out of our Golang application.